And we are live.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is February 15th, 2022. I'm Joe Benning, the chair of the committee, and we are here to talk about several things within the governor's proposed budget adjustment. Committee members are, going across my screen anyway, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator Parent from Franklin County, Senator Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle, and Senator McCormick from Windsor County. Just for the edification of those of you who are presently here that are witnesses, I personally have to take a break at 2 o'clock. I don't imagine that any of you are actually going to still be there, but if you happen to be, I'm going to take a break at 2 o'clock to go attend a court appearance, and then I'll be coming back. Gus, I have you up first as the list of witnesses here today, and I'm assuming you're going to take the lead in the conversation about this particular subject, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board updates and annual report. I'm going to let everybody know who has joined you at this stage that if you have not been with us yet this year, we're keeping in mind we have a YouTube audience. We have no idea how many or if there's anybody out there, but we are going to assume there are people out there and that they have not all become quite familiar with the committee process or the topics of conversation that we're talking about. So the point is to try to get everybody to first introduce themselves with a little bit of background about who you are and how you fit into this process. And secondly, when you are speaking, try to keep the language at a level that is about as plain English as you can possibly get. If you happen to be wandering through testimony and I hear something that's an acronym or something that you and I may understand, but I suspect maybe somebody on YouTube does not, I may interrupt your testimony to ask you to clarify something. It's not because I'm trying to be rude. I just want to make sure everybody that's watching has the same page that we are on. Having said all that, Gus, welcome back to Senate Institutions. The floor is yours, sir. And again, please give us a basic biographical background before you begin.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Gus Seelig. I serve as the Executive Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I'll be doing most of the talking on our behalf today. With me is our new, to us but not to you, Director of Planning, Trey Martin, who's had a variety of roles that you're familiar with in the past, most recently at Let's Grow Kids, and our Policy Director, Jen Holler. The Housing and Conservation Board is considered to be a quasi-public institution. We function sort of like a public foundation, which is to say that you appropriate funds to us, and our job is to turn it around within the context of our enabling statute and get it back to your constituents to do good things in their communities related to our housing and conservation and rural community development mission. And the staff asked us to talk about, as you indicated, Mr. Chairman, our annual report to you, and we'll focus in particular on those items that are part of the capital construction budget that the governor has recommended, but just generally give you a background of what we've been up to. And please, I know Zoom is always a little harder for all of us, but I wouldn't feel like I was in the right place if I didn't get asked a question or two or five or six and get interrupted along the way. And I very much appreciate the jargon alert, given the much wider audience you have. And we'll try not to use jargon, but I think it's one of those illnesses that those of us who've been bureaucrats for too long sometimes suffer from. So with that, I think what I do, unless you have any further clarifications for me, is to share the screen and give you a presentation.
That would be great.
Okay. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the work that we do in conjunction with the funding that you give us. This is a picture of the Sprague Farm which is in Brookfield along the White River. And one of the line items in the governor's budget that you've supported for a number of years now is for the board to make grants for water quality improvements. And this is one of those grants that you're looking at to provide housing for the very young stock and a roof over it in a way that contains the manure and keeps it from going into the White River. We make grants of up to $40,000. I'll talk about that a little bit later in another slide. This broadly is our mission statement in 10 VSA Chapter 15, which Senator Mazza had a hand in enabling into law many years ago. The function of the board is to both conserve the Vermont countryside, but also to help develop our town and village centers and downtowns. This is, you're looking at the Shaftesbury, North Bennington town line here. That body of water is in Shaftesbury. It's Lake Perrin. And this is an example where we've done some development work right on the town line, but also conserved land around the pond. I guess the other thing I want to say about our mission statement here is that we're told to do the work we do with a lens toward both economic vitality and quality of life. And I hope as we go through the presentation, you'll see that the investments that the governor's asking you to make and that you've been so supportive of over years does go to that very mission with that lens of economic vitality. This is from our annual report, simply speaking, what the big results are that we got this year for Vermonters, or over fiscal year 21 and the first half of fiscal year 22. I'm not going to try to read all the numbers that are on the slide, but I'll make note of 3 or 4 things. The first is that we've always promised to take state funds and get leverage from other sources for it, and we continue to do that, as you can see with those lines at the very top. The number of homes and apartments we invested in this year is likely double or a little bit more than double than what you saw in prior years, in part because of the influx of federal funding. And the number of intergenerational transfers of farms is almost half the farms that we buy conservation easements from. And we'll talk about this again a little bit more, give an example, but buying development rights helps reduce the cost of purchasing a farm by usually 40 to 60%, and that makes it possible for young folks to be able to buy farms. The other thing I'll point to is the number of farm and forest enterprises that we have provided business planning and technical assistance to. And that number is people who are engaged in our full business planning program. But with COVID relief funds, we actually also helped an additional 525 people, either with the need to pivot their business to new markets or in applying for the various federal relief programs. On the right are the various impacts that we have. So people think of us as maybe 2 programs or 3 programs, but we're really involved in outdoor recreation. We're involved in climate mitigation. We're involved in conserving our historic gathering places. We'll show you some examples of that. And we're very much focused on rural communities. We do work in our larger towns, but the picture you see above is residents of Westford celebrating the acquisition of a town forest that's adjacent to their elementary school. And I'd say for any community the size of Westford, that's a pretty impressive turnout of people who were quite excited about that occasion. In our annual report this year, there is a focus on St. Johnsbury as an example of the impact we can have in a community in a number of different ways. I've talked in the past, so I won't dwell on the New Avenue apartment complex that opened back up this fall after a year and a half's worth of renovation, except to say that those of you who don't know downtown St. Johnsbury can see what a prominent and important building it was to restore. And it was the community's #1 community development priority after the Council on Rural Development did a visit there a few years ago. And your former chair worked with Senator Kitchell to make sure that there was some special attention for the Northeast Kingdom um, in that time. But over recent years, the Fairbanks Museum got a major grant to do an expansion. They needed local match. We've provided a grant to help them meet that local match. This year, the community came to us with wanting to purchase Observatory Knob, which is 117 acres that's used by lots of people to hike and picnic and walk and snowshoe. And so that acquisition happened late in the year. And then a private developer went to Rural Edge. He owned the old hospital, Bright Look Apartments, 17 apartments. He knew he could get a pretty penny for it, but he also knew he had a lot of elderly residents. And Rural Edge came to us for some help to do the acquisition so that people would not have their rents raised anywhere from $200 to $400 a month and be displaced from their long-term homes. So the preservation of affordable housing. We've been more focused on new construction in recent years, but the preservation of affordable housing and not having people lose their apartments has always been a part of our mission. These next two charts are to give you some sense of what's going on in the real estate market. And I'd say there are two different dynamics happening here. One is in higher priced communities, people are coming in and buying up housing at extraordinary costs, sometimes sight unseen, often without inspections, cash buyers. I'm sure you've all heard the stories of constituents who'd like to buy a home, and it's become such a competitive market. But at the entry end, and I don't have the data to show you today, but I've looked at Ferrisburgh and Barry City, communities that had much lower priced housing. We've seen the housing go up dramatically there as well. So the cost of entry into the home ownership market has really, really changed in recent years. In Ferrisburgh, it went from under 200,000 to over 300,000 over about a 3-year period. In Barry City, it's gone up about $70,000 for each home that's been sold. And this chart comes from your economists and just shows you what's going on in terms of the property transfer tax. So there is a huge amount of pressure in the marketplace, and our job is to help mitigate that pressure and to make land and housing more accessible to everyday Vermonters. Here are a few examples of capital bill investments that we've made. The Lind Homes in South Reigate were built for workers many years ago, and we've just made a significant investment there. A long time ago, when Representative Al Stevens was still with us, he started the Wells River Action Project, and we supported that. And this year, the buildings that we helped to preserve and invest in about 25 years ago got reinvestment. This project helped keep the post office in Wells River. And at the bottom left, the bottom of the slide is from Brattleboro, where we expanded shelter capacity. But we work on the home ownership end of things as well. And so over the last 2 years, almost $1 million from capital bill appropriations has been used to help people into home ownership in all the communities you see listed here. This young woman and her son and her mother, just with the aid of Habitat for Humanity, just bought their first home. She's been here for about 16 years as a Vermonter. She's a production manager at a place called Small Batch Organics, and she's just thrilled to have a home. We build about 5 to 7 homes with Habitat for Humanity every year, and that doesn't seem like very many, but over time, we're well past 157 homes. So they've made a big difference, and that's faith-based people doing great work all over the state. We're involved in 2 new construction home ownership projects right now. The top picture is a building under construction in Woodstock. It'll be 4 homes. And the bottom picture, and we're seeing more and more of this as the housing crisis worsens, the city of Winooski provided free land at the O'Brien Center just out of downtown, a stone's throw from downtown, to build this 20-unit condominium building. And we got an investment from out of state through something called the New Market Tax Credits to help make it affordable and leverage our funds further. They've just started marketing this building. It won't be available for occupancy till the fall. And I think they've already signed on that I think they've had 50 applicants and already qualified 8 homeowners. So it will, in this market, sell out very quickly. We use something called shared appreciation, which is kind of a pay it forward philosophy. People get in at a reduced price with the help that you provide to us and we provide to them. And then when they decide it's time to sell, they don't take the full appreciation that gets rolled forward. So we've invested in a little over 1,200 homes around the state, and there have been 1,900 different homeowners. And it means the second and third purchasers we don't need to subsidize in a future time. And this chart just tells you for the Champlain Housing Trust, which is the biggest organization that does this work, the various employment statuses of the homeowners that they assist. And it's all the things that makes up our economy, people that we think of and understand to be essential workers across our workforce, whether they're in healthcare or they're working in schools or nonprofit organizations or the private sector. Again, to focus on the issue that the governor has raised for us of how do we support the next generation in Vermont, this family, the Cesarios, received several different kinds of assistance from us. They were able to buy their farm because of the purchase of development rights. They've gotten business assistance through the Farm and Forest Viability Program, and they also got a grant to improve their water quality with our support. And that would have been funded again by the Capitol bill. I don't know if any of you read the New York Times. I told a story a few years back in this committee about how the town of West Windsor came to us after the lodge had burned at Mount Ascutney. The ski area was not going to continue. I'm sure Senator McCormick can tell you that real estate prices had dropped there dramatically. The store had closed. And 2 weeks ago, the Times ran a story, as you can see, titled "A Town That Saved a Mountain and a Mountain That Saved a Town." The store is reopened. The housing market is much healthier. And this has become a great recreational asset. And Mr. Chairman, they really were trying to take a page from Kingdom Trails and really worked on becoming a place that people would want to be at all 4 seasons with their bicycles or on foot or on skis. I think, as I understand it, they've restored a rope tow, but not the lifts. So lots of great recreation as an economic engine for this community. We've also been involved most recently in Sharon and Stratford and just closed on this a few weeks ago. You'll remember that a fellow from Utah bought up quite a lot of land and wanted to build 5,000 homes up high in the hills. The community on one particular parcel wanted to conserve it, and they had made a deal with him, with our help, that's creating a new town forest for 2 communities. It's the first time we've had a town forest that 2 communities are sharing. And also worked with the folks at the South Hero Land Trust to conserve 47 acres that I think includes some wetlands and lots of other trails up in South Hero. And we're seeing more and more community forest projects around the state. To talk about climate, which I know has become a bigger and bigger issue for a number of your colleagues, obviously forests are important in terms of absorbing carbon. These 2 projects are projects we've done in the last couple of years. One, 750 acres in Stowe that had been closed to public access for quite a time. The Stowe community raised a huge amount of money. We made actually a pretty small grant to help them secure this. And this is a critical crossing point from the Worcester Range over into the Northeast Kingdom. So a really critical linchpin in terms of the movement of habitat. The same thing with the Okemo lands in Mount Holly, a really critical pinch point in terms of the travel of wildlife. So both those things have been accomplished in the last 2 years. Just broadly speaking to our work in the built environment, we're building highly efficient buildings, we're rehabbing buildings well, and as these numbers indicate, doing lots with renewable energy, including modern wood heat, which is now close to 1,000 apartments, well over 900. The building you see here was the first building to get a passive house certification. That's in Milton and was part of redevelopment of a downtown as well. Speaking further to climate, this is a site in Brattleboro that Sir Sosimo Lumber sat on, and the Whetstone Brook is adjacent. And basically, what's happening here is the floodplain is being restored in conjunction with some EPA brownfields money. Why is that important? Representative Dean calls the Whetstone a dinky little brook. But in the inset photo that you see here, that's a public housing development called Melrose Terrace that had flooded 4 times in 10 years, including Tropical Storm Irene. And it was a project for the elderly. It was not just built in the floodplain, it was built actually in the floodway back in the 60s. So we've now created 73 apartments, opened the last 18 over by the high school in Brattleboro, adjacent to a pharmacy, across from a shopping center, to relocate people out of there. And this site is also being primarily restored so the river can go where the river is going to go the next time that it floods. Further down along the Whetstone, this is the largest mobile home park, and I know Senator McCormick's looking at environmental justice in his other committee. This is over 300 homes in this mobile home park, and what you see in red are about 35 homes that are, again, located in the floodway. We provided a planning grant a few years ago, and we expect we'll make an appropriation dependent upon an application sometime this year to help begin to move people out of harm's way here as well. Speaking to that opening slide of clean water and how we're trying to leverage the dollars you give us, what you see in this chart for the water quality funding that grants that we provide is that farmers themselves are either using their cash, providing in kind, or borrowing money in about an equal amount to the grants we make. And we're leveraging both the EQIP funds from the federal government and the BMP program at the Agency of Agriculture. This program is designed to be flexible, so we've also helped in a few cases where somebody is never going to be a priority for NRCS get their project done and, again, protect water quality. And this is the woman whose farm you saw in Brookfield, and here's a farm up in Albany, young couple working with Jasper Hill Creamery that were able to build a new manure packing stacking pad with our assistance. These farmers are up in Franklin County and lots of frontage on the Missisquoi as part of their conservation project. They have a special treatment area around 6.5 acres of wetlands. And they've also negotiated with DEC, separate from us, a river corridor easement that takes up about a half mile of the Missisquoi's frontage.
Any relatives, Senator Parrott?
I was going to say good last name, but no.
Okay.
Yeah, we understood they were not relatives, no conflict of interest.
No, it's funny because the parent name's actually is pretty prevalent in Franklin County. I'm not related to a single one of them.
And you've made a big investment in the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail, and a big chunk of it will cross through the scenery that people will see on this farm. Senator Ingalls, you probably know that NVDA did not want to be the clean water service provider for Lake Memphremagog. The Agency of Natural Resources asked us if we'd consider playing that role. We've agreed to give it a try. We've hired a woman from Newport to help, Kendall Lambert, to help manage it for us. She'll be taking the lead up there. So we're glad we have a local person on scene, and we'll be talking with you more about that in future years as the agency launches the program.
We're just more interested in knowing whether we're a lake in the crisis, as some groups have painted us, and we're trying to figure all that out. But thank you for what you're doing.
Well, whether you're in crisis or we're just going to do a lot of preventative work so we don't get to a crisis, we're happy to work with the community.
Thank you.
As you all know, opioids have become a major problem in the state of Vermont. We have funded now 3 recovery residences that are under renovation, one in Barre, one in Colchester, and soon one in Bennington, to provide places for people to go who are in recovery and have sober living. These are not intense treatment facilities. These are kind of the next step after treatment. And again, something we'll continue to work on around the state. Big focus of our work, as you all know, is in our downtowns. So whether it's St. Albans or Springfield or Brattleboro or Montpelier or St. Jay, as we visited before, bringing old buildings back to life and making sure people have access to them is a big part of our work. About 10 years ago, we completed the old movie theater building in downtown Springfield that you see on the far left. And this year we finished the Wilson block, which is across the way. And I'm looking forward post-COVID to being able to see the completed, what it looks like on the inside. My board visited it before the renovations began. Here's what's in the governor's proposed budget for you. About $800,000 for our ag water quality projects, $2 million for conservation and water quality, and $1.8 million for housing and conservation projects. And we have an enormous pipeline, over almost $72 million of housing projects people are working on around the state, $15 million of farm projects, over $10 million of recreation and forest land projects, and lots of opportunities, as you saw with St. Jay, with the Fairbanks, but much smaller venues as well. There's for historic community buildings. So I think that covers what we wanted to report to you on. Other than to say here are a few examples of what is yet to come. These are not done deals by any means, but we've had conversations on and off for a decade about the convent up in Newport. Brattleboro has made a commitment that they want to put housing on the upper floors of their municipal building, and we've just received an application for this site in Hartford, adjacent to the Haven, which is the homeless service provider, both for 25 new apartments and for expanded shelter capacity. So with that, we're happy to take the slideshow down and answer any questions that you have for us.
Yeah, if you could take the slideshow down so I can see hands. Senator Mazza.
If anybody has followed Gus over the years, I would like to know how many thousands and thousands of units that you've had your fingerprints on over the years, because you've been doing this for so many years. It's unbelievable, all over the state, and a good job at it. But what happens now with the cost going up so 20, 25, 30%? That's going to limit the amount of money you're going to be able to invest. Is that correct? Because property values and building materials and everything else have gone up 20, 30% in some areas. So that's going to be a challenge, isn't it, for money?
It is. What I would say, Senator, and this causes me to lose sleep most nights. Let me make it personal for a moment. My daughter does disability law for Vermont Legal Aid, so she's not at the high end of the food chain among attorneys, and she'd like to build a home here in Calais on our land. And a friend of mine who's been building for 30 years came and met with her, and she said, I only need a small home, maybe 12 to 1,500 square feet. And he said, Rachel, I can't even begin to plan when we'd start for 9 to 12 months. And right now, the local lumber company will hold pricing for me for 48 hours. So I can't tell you what the materials will cost. I can tell you what the labor would be with the design, but I can't tell you what the materials are going to cost. And then he said to her, but even with free land, don't count on spending less than $400,000. So we're at a really difficult point. The reason we're going to be able to make progress over the next few years is because the governor has asked you, and you've said yes so far, to appropriate lots of funding from the federal government, from the CRF program first, and now from Arpa. But I think this is not just a Vermont problem. As I talk to colleagues in Maine and New Hampshire and around the country, the cost is enormous. There are lots of ways I think we can attack it, but fundamentally, we're likely not to see the price of materials go down dramatically, and we're not going to see the cost of labor go down. So it's going to be really hard for lots of Vermonters to meet their housing needs, and it's something we're going to have to decide how we attack this problem. There are in your policy committee, Senator Sorokin and Senator Brock are working on a big housing bill. I think they want to attack lots of issues, including planning and zoning and incentives, but this is a very, very hard and difficult challenge.
The other follow-up I have is why do you think there's such a demand? There's no, I don't care where they're building apartments, but whether it's Chittenden County or all over the state, the demand is so great. I mean, our population isn't growing, but yet there isn't an apartment that's empty, whether it's in Will County or Essex County or St. Johnsbury or wherever. People are waiting for apartments. Where are they coming from?
Well, I wish I had an easy answer to that, but I've heard you ask that before. One thing I can tell you is that when you and I were both younger and we were starting this program, each Vermont household had about 3 people per household. Today, it's about 2. So whether that's because people are more likely to get divorced or we're older and kids have gone away. But so if we have the same number of people in Vermont, but there's only 2 people in each house, it takes a lot more housing to house people.
No.
The other thing that I think we saw this after 9/11 and we're seeing it today, it doesn't take a lot of people coming up here from New York or Connecticut or Boston or DC who, when they leave there, even if they're not wealthy, but they had a house, they have a lot of cash as they cash out those assets. And so that if only a couple thousand people come up here wanting to buy, it doesn't take a lot of buyers to have a big impact on the real estate market.
Yeah. God, it's amazing. Thank you.
Senator Parent.
So, Gus, we heard Senator Clarkson, and I think you mentioned it when you were in here earlier, but the cost of developing a new unit is high as $300,000 a unit. And, I think we had a conversation as this committee, I own apartment buildings, Russ has sold some. We still can't contemplate the cost of building something new at $300,000 per unit. That still seems astronomical in light of where we are. One, is that price really where we are? And 2, what's driving that cost? And is it something that we have control over?
Well, I think we need more control over it, and I don't know that we do. One of the difficulties is that there's lots of things that might help at the margin, but the fact is, we don't have enough workers, and so maybe it's a good thing that people are making more money pounding nails and doing electrical and plumbing, but we don't have enough of them, and so there's a scarcity of labor, of really skilled labor. We likely need to enhance incentives for density. The trouble with just doing that by itself is that when you say, okay, instead of building four homes per acre, you can build 10 or 20, the value of that real estate goes up too. So we've got, permitting is a part of the difficulty, but it's not. In my experience, we've had very few problems with Act 250 over the years, but there's no doubt any developer will tell you that navigating the various permits they need is a challenge, takes time, takes care, takes attention, and costs them money, whether it's engineers or attorneys, to make sure they're doing everything right. So there's a lot, and then all the supply chain interruptions have had a big impact on materials. which I'd say is the thing we probably have the least control over. So, we need to deal with this from a planning perspective. We need to deal with this from a workforce perspective. But I often say to people, without the public intervention to lower the cost, the other things we do will be good things to do, but they're not going to fix the fact that it's just too expensive.
Other questions? Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Gus, I appreciate how much of your display involved Windsor County. And the fact is, you folks are very good for my constituents, and I appreciate it. I want to just, out of curiosity, but also as a representative of how things work. Several years ago, you folks participated in renovating what was known derisively as the Block in Windsor, Union Street. And it was a kind of an apartment house that looked like it didn't belong in Vermont in the first place. Really, belonged in one of the northeastern cities. And it had deteriorated badly. It was frankly a slum. And there was, drugs being sold. It was a bad place. And it had earlier in history been a place where young families started out, lived for a while, and then moved out into a nicer house. But now it had become a really bad place. And it looked real good when you opened it. I want to know, what is it like however many years later? It's probably 10 years later now.
Well, I like all of us, I've been traveling the state a lot less the last 2 years, so I haven't stopped there to really talk to people in the last 2 years. But the last time I was through Windsor, it looked pretty good to me. You live in that part of the state, so I really have to defer to you to say, every now and then I have a legislator say to me, you need to get the local folks to pay more attention to that building. They haven't painted it or something. But that was such a massive renovation, such a big investment. And by the way, that the owner of that building that you call the Block was the same person who owned the New Avenue building in St. Johnsbury. He was from out of state. He didn't care about either community.
Right.
Just a terrible owner. So, my understanding is it's doing pretty well, but I'll make an inquiry with the people who manage it and get back to you further.
Well, that's not necessary. I thought if you had some information, or my sense is that it's still looking good. That's where I was actually thinking we were going.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. That was my impression the last time I drove by.
Yeah, because the talk on the street in Windsor often involved the kind of those people kind of rhetoric. Those people, you give them a nice place, they'll wreck it in 6 months. And I haven't seen that.
Well, in both cases of Windsor and St. Johnsbury, what happened for us is that, and I remember this, when they made the presentation to our board, it wasn't just the developer who came in. They came in with the local chamber of commerce, with a representative from the hospital, from the school system, from the select board, all saying, our downtown in Windsor cannot move forward until you fix this building. And I think the same thing happened in St. Johnsbury, where essentially after that community visit, the community said, this is our number one community development priority. Our community can't move forward. There was a terrible, for multi-years, bedbug infestation. The commercial space had been mostly vacant for most of 30 years. I mean, there may be an occasional tenant, but people wouldn't stay. And it was just a drag on the downtown. And that's a big part of why we've had such a focus across the state on these key downtown buildings.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm looking for good things in Springfield too.
Other questions? Gus, I'm happy to report that between last Friday and today, as I look at your pictures, and we looked at pictures from Rural Edge last week, just driving around the state, things are beginning to look better. And that's really appreciative. You guys are doing a lot of great work around the state, and it's becoming very familiar as I travel and I see these pictures that you're presenting. So for that, thank you very much. I was also going to chastise you. The committee voted 4-1 a couple of weeks ago that any witness who comes in and starts off by giving Senator Mazza special attention, we automatically take off points for that. That was the way you began your conversation today. You
Well,
also,
I'm just going to have to live with that. That's a struggle, but I've known Senator Mazza for a long time, and he's a great teacher of how the Vermont Senate works, and taught me a lot in my younger years when I made lots of mistakes.
so you're going to continue giving him compliments as you leave us today.
I'm telling you, I owe him my political education.
Appreciate that. You brought Trey and Jennifer along with you. I don't know if either one of you had something you'd like to tell us this afternoon. Trey, I should welcome you to the conversation. I don't think you've been before us with this particular subject before.
No, it's really nice to visit with the committee this afternoon, though. And, if Gus wasn't so good at telling you all the stories, I would have jumped in an awful lot and added. But it's a great education for me to be with him and with you all. So I don't have anything that I want to share this afternoon other than I am really excited to be here with Jen and Gus and part of the great work of the board and the authority that you give us to help Vermonters. So thanks for the chance to say that, Senator.
Good to find. Just keep in mind that little bit about Senator Mazza in the future in case you have to testify for Gus.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Uh-oh, what did I do now?
Oh, never mind.
Oh.
Well,
Jen,
Mr. Carroll,
anything you want to add, Jen?
Hi, Jen. Hi, Jen.
so I'll just add my thanks to Trey and Gus's, but then also say that Alex has our annual report for VHCB, and then we have a specific report related to the Farm and Forest Viability Program. And we actually report to you on every single grant we make. So if you're interested, we can only have so much time, and clearly we're intentional about which stories we pick and choose to share with you. But there are good stories all around the state, and those are all enumerated in our annual report. You can see every single grant we make. It's part of our being accountable to you.
Great to know. Well, we appreciate you all coming, and we'll let Senator Mazza stew on him having been talked about while he stepped away from the camera.
Yeah, I wish I knew what it was about.
We will see you again, as they say, folks. And I do know that the Capitol bill is still in the House possession and will be coming to our way eventually. If there's in fact something they've done that you're not real happy about, by all means, reach back out to us after town meeting day. We'll see what we can do to correct the problem. How's that?
Thank you for your time and your questions. We appreciate seeing all of you.
We'll see you again. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Committee, we're going to shift gears here to the Arpa Capital Fund project proposal for libraries specifically. And I am pleased to welcome Catherine Del Neo. I hope I have not clobbered your name there, Catherine. I see you on the screen, your name only at the moment. I'm not sure if you have video capability. We also have Thomas McMurdo and Doug Farnham along with you to talk about this particular area. I'd like to welcome all three of you to the program this afternoon. Let me say, since I know you were not on earlier, what we try to do in the committee is be cognizant of those who are out there in YouTube land. We don't know who they are. We don't know if there's anybody out there or if there's hundreds out there. But as we talk about things moving forward, we try to keep the conversation at a low enough level, not substantively, but figuratively speaking, that people can understand what we're all talking about. So sometimes you may be testifying about something in a way that you and I may know perfectly well what we're talking about, but then I get the feeling as the chair that somebody out there in YouTube land may not. So if I interrupt your testimony, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to make sure we're all talking on the same playing field in a way that folks can all understand. The other part of this particular portion of the program is that I personally have to go and attend a court appearance at 2 o'clock. So if you are continuing to roll through that 2 o'clock hour, that's okay. Senator McCormick will be taking over, and then I'll jump back in whenever I can get out of the court proceeding.
We'll get things done when the new chair steps in.
This is like,
I'll give, I should say to the three of you now, which I did say to Gus Seelig and our previous witnesses, you don't want to start off giving compliments to the senator from Colchester. He somehow or other, he just keeps getting into the conversation. I'm not really sure why, but we voted 4-1 to make sure he doesn't get special compliments. So, having said all that, the first person on my list is Catherine. And I don't know, Catherine, if you're going to join us on screen or not. There you are. I have a special question for you when we go to begin. I have received communication recently from somebody from Hardwick to talk about the expansion program at the Judivine Library. I don't know whether that is a topic of conversation you're already familiar with, but if you are not, if you could shoot me an email and let me know, I can provide you the contact information for the person who asked me. So welcome to Senate Institutions, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today with my colleague, Tom McMurdo. My name is Catherine Delnau. I'm the very new state librarian for the state of Vermont. I just began in my role yesterday. I have heard a little bit about the issue that you just mentioned, but I'm not fully up to speed on it. So it would be really helpful if you could shoot me an email. My email address is catherine.delnau@vermont.gov. And if I may, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Tom McMurdo, who will do a PowerPoint presentation, and then I will also share some comments.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I will just briefly share this presentation that was shared with the committee. If I can remember how to do this in Zoom, so please bear with me for a moment.
Our committee assistant is a master at this subject, Tom, so if you need to reach out, just yell Alex and he'll help.
Okay, well, Alex is probably going to need to help me stop sharing when this is over, but in the meantime, here we are. So just very briefly, we have the beautiful Bradford Public Library here. It's an older building, as you can see, it's brick with turrets. It's one of those buildings we like to think of when we think about Vermont libraries. So this is the Vermont Department of Libraries Capital Fund grants proposal. And we see here, we are asking for, oh, I'm sorry, there's an error in this presentation. I'm sorry, I have the old one. We're actually asking for $15,900,000 for construction, renovation, and repairs for Vermont Public Libraries. That would be $15 million for grants and $900,000 for 2 limited service administrative positions over a 4-year to 4.5-year duration. I want to emphasize that amount, the $900,000 is for total compensation for those positions. It is not the base salary there. So those positions will evaluate grants, handle reporting requirements, and other administrative functions. Grants will be for repairs, renovation, and construction, favoring proposals that increase accessibility and better adherence to ADA regulations. And here to the left, we see a bucket catching a roof leak at the Rochester Public Library in Rochester, Vermont. So continuing, our rationale is that the Library Services and Construction Act, that's LSCA, became the Library Services and Technology Act on October 1st, 1996. That made a tremendous amount of sense at the time and still makes a lot of sense because one of the things that we think about when we think about libraries is this is where people get their computer access and their internet access. So back in the mid-90s, there were a great majority, almost, I think, a majority of libraries in the state that did not have computers in the library. So this was an important step to make. But the flip side of that is that it's been 26 years since any federal or state funds specifically earmarked for library construction needs have been allocated to this purpose to our knowledge. Vermont public libraries are overwhelmingly housed in antique buildings that need constant upkeep and often have historic building regulations. I can guess that when you folks think about your libraries, including the Hardwick Judivine Library, you're thinking about an older building, probably something that is at least 100 years old, often. I think that's true for most of the libraries in your districts. So those have special needs when it comes to construction and upkeep. Towns and library boards do their best to maintain these buildings, but in some cases they are literally falling apart, which you may see in some of these photographs. The Department of Libraries has surveyed public libraries twice in the past year, including this month. We've got an ongoing survey regarding construction priorities. Over 69% of respondents stated that their greatest construction need would help them meet Americans with Disability Act requirements. So if you think about ADA, that was passed in 1990. LSCA became LSTA in 1996. So effectively, libraries only had 6 years of federal funding, and it wasn't exactly a river of funding. It was some funding to attempt to meet those ADA requirements. And just imagine in a 120-year-old building how expensive and difficult that can be. So I would like to emphasize again that open and accessible means open and accessible to everyone. Here we see a disintegrating tile floor at the Fletcher Memorial Library in Ludlow. It's a beautiful building. U.S. Treasury guidance for the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, which I'm sure you gentlemen are aware of and familiar with, specifically names libraries in their eligibility statement. I won't read this quote, but it's quite clear that libraries are one of the primary intended uses for this money. All Vermont public libraries provide access to the internet for their communities. And this is the only internet access for many Vermonters. Treasury guidelines state that eligible costs include personnel costs, including salaries and fringe benefits for staff and consultants required for carrying out a capital project. And that is the mechanism that we're using to fund those two positions. Here you see a cracked floor at the Westford Public Library in Westford, Vermont. So about our survey data, again, I mentioned that we had been surveying libraries about this. So we started a survey in January, and it's still ongoing. So far, we have seen that 88 improvements were cited in 73 of the 157 top needs. Again, ADA was passed in 1990, so mentioned that. Mold, moisture mitigation and repairs, bathroom renovations or additions are critical needs. At least 2 Vermont public libraries do not have bathrooms or indoor bathrooms. There are also HVAC issues, which are a primary concern during COVID and are a top need as well. Here we see on the left a critical structural rot and pedestal damage supporting the roof at the Wethersfield Proctor Library in Wethersfield. So if you know anything about construction or about rot, you could see that this is going nowhere fast and not a good situation. Again, these older buildings, it's a beautiful old building, but costs a lot to keep it up. Continuing the survey data that we're receiving, many libraries responded that they need more space. Public libraries function on the front line of services for many Vermonters. Meeting rooms for parent-child contact, which used to be known as supervised visitation, is a big thing. Privacy for medical appointments, job interviews, business meetings, and general community meetings are needed in every space. I'm thinking of a conversation I had with the folks out at Alberg, at the Alberg Library when we were there for Capital for a Day. And a big thing that they were talking about is how they handled almost all frontline services for folks, including everything from applying for WIC to arranging for people to get rides to the nearest pediatrician. So there's a lot going on at libraries that doesn't appear on the face, but would be substantially helped with this money. Again, libraries are the center of the community in most towns in Vermont, and space to fulfill this mission is vital. We saw that during Irene, where oftentimes the information center, the kind of triage place for getting information out and dealing with folks was the town library. And here we see some kind of gross, suspicious looking mold and cracked glass at the Arvin A. Brown Library in Richford.
Hey, Tom, I'm going to have to interrupt
Yes, sir.
for just a second. I need to leave, so Senator McCormick, if you could take over, that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee's in good hands.
Yes, it is.
I think. I'll try.
All right, thanks. I'll continue. Just, I was hoping to hit that 2 o'clock margin, but I didn't quite make it. All right, we're almost there. Need is not limited. The January 20th issue of the Addison County Independent had a story about how Middlebury's Ilsley Library is fighting to keep its aging boiler going. They're looking for over $1 million bond issue for that, which they're having trouble doing. But this is a great and timely example of how the need for capital funds is not limited to rural libraries, and some of our more affluent communities have critical needs that aren't being met as well. So broken out, worn out, moisture damaged, or simply inaccessible is part of everyday life at many Vermont libraries. This is a photo of a staircase at the Fletcher Memorial Library in Ludlow, which is hazardous, unusable, and taped off. If you can see in the photo there, there's some broken stairs, there's peeling paint. It's probably lead paint based on the age of the building, and there's a sign that says "Do not enter." This is not what you want to see at your public library. And finally, this proposal will provide sorely needed funds for libraries. This request is directly in line with U.S. Treasury guidelines for this money. Libraries are a great investment and return every dollar invested in them multifold to their communities. I have never seen people who can stretch a dollar like librarians. So you're going to see an excellent return on investment with this money. And I would also say that libraries cannot thrive on goodwill alone. Everyone loves libraries, but it is time to invest in these institutions that are so vital to the quality of life in Vermont. And here we see on the left a staircase at the Windsor Library, which goes to the children's room, and only some children can go down that staircase. So thank you for allowing me to present this, and I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions from the committee?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I was going to share a brief statement as well before we took questions, if that is permissible.
Is that okay with you, Senator Mazel? Can you hold? Okay, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks so much. My name is Catherine Delnau. I'm the State Librarian and Commissioner of Libraries in Vermont. And I really appreciate this opportunity to share my support for the library's capital project proposal, which will help to ensure that Vermonters across the state have continued access to the internet at Vermont's public libraries. Census data from 2021 reflects that roughly 10% of Vermonters do not have home computers, and that about 18.5% of Vermonters do not have broadband access in their homes. Even in households that have access to the internet, the speed of their internet connection may not actually be adequate to enable them to do everything that they need to do online. And for those community members, the internet connections and the computing equipment in their public library are a key resource. So our library's capital project proposal aims to ensure that access to these resources is maintained and improved at libraries across the state. Vermonters who cannot afford home internet access, who cannot afford home computers, or who have lower speed internet rely on their local public libraries to get online and do everyday things like work, attend classes and trainings, and to go to telemedicine visits. We believe that every Vermonter should be able to access the internet equally. And the guidance from the US Treasury about the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund recognizes the important role that our public libraries play in ensuring that equal access to the internet by specifically naming libraries in their eligibility statement related to these one-time funds. We're really appreciative that the state legislature commissioned the working group for the status of public libraries, which began meeting in September of this past year. I have great confidence in the work that the team at the Department of Libraries has done in engaging public library staff across the state to learn of the challenges those libraries need to overcome to ensure that they can continue to provide access to the internet and computer equipment within their physical spaces, the libraries themselves. It's very important that we support our community public libraries in addressing these building issues that rise to a level that could actually prevent all of the members of the community from entering the library and accessing the internet, which has shown to be so important, particularly in times of emergencies. such as the COVID-19 pandemic. We envision that the building improvement needs at individual libraries will vary. They could range from something as simple as a ramp to ensure that people who have mobility issues can access the space, to something like a study room that provides a place for community members to meet with their doctors, or even a space for family visitation. These funds could also be leveraged to improve HVAC systems, air circulation, air quality. Approved, those $15 million will go a long way toward helping to ensure Vermont's public libraries can continue to provide internet access to all of the Vermonters, including those who have the greatest need. I'm a newcomer at the Department of Libraries. I just started yesterday, but I want to share that I'm so appreciative of the work that Tom has done as the interim state librarian, and the team at the Department of Libraries has developed this proposal so that it really enhances what we're already doing at the Department of Libraries. So by incorporating funding for the construction manager and the administrative staff member in the proposal, we've really built in this additional capacity that we'll need to rely on to administer this one-time grant funding. Having these two limited service positions in our team for 4 years will ensure that we can administer this grant funding while continuing to do the other really key work that we already are funded to perform. I also want to mention that we are poised to begin developing a rubric that we can use to evaluate grant applications. We envision that the rubric will draw on the experience of the construction manager that's really specific to building projects, but that will also be informing that rubric with data points similar to the criteria we've used to allocate other ARPA funding in the past year, which includes broadband connectivity levels, poverty levels.
We've just lost you again.
I think I came back though. Am I back?
Okay.
Okay, I was just listing a couple of things. So our rubric that we've used for other grant funds associated with ARPA has included broadband connectivity, poverty levels, unemployment statistics, and other key metrics that help us to really identify which are the communities with the highest needs. Again, I want to just thank you for this opportunity to share a proposal with you, and my colleague Tom McMurdo and I are happy to answer questions you may have about the proposal. Thank you.
Yes. Before we go further, could clarify for me, please, how to pronounce your last name? Make sure we get it right.
Sure. My last name is Delneo.
Delneo.
Delneo, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And congratulations on your.
Thank you. I'm thrilled
position.
to be here. Thank you so much.
Okay, there's a third witness here. Are you, Mr. Farnham, are you planning to speak?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair. Douglas Farnham, Deputy Secretary of Administration. I'd be happy to wait until after the committee's questions if you'd like. What I intended to speak on was more about the federal eligibility and to provide the committee with some context on how the administration is approaching these federal funds and other pandemic federal funds. So I can wait a little bit if you'd like.
Okay, why don't we do that? Just your ask. Are you happy with what's in the governor's recommend now? You're just asking us to stick with it, or is it inadequate in your view? That's to both of you. You can.
The Department of Libraries feels that this is a large amount of money, and that we have some really great support from the governor and his team, and that this level of funding will enable us to do a lot to really support this initiative in our public libraries.
So you're asking us to not mess with it?
Certainly not to reduce it, yes.
Yes, okay, that's a questions from the committee. Senator Mazza.
We in my district, South Hero, just built a brand new library a couple of years ago. It's beautiful from the ground up. It's brand new. But you know, it's interesting because all this debate we've heard today, not one person has mentioned books. I know there's all kinds of services. Do libraries have books anymore, or because everything is about is people go there for computers and meetings, which is great. I understand it's a community center, and I know the one in South Hero is used for that. But I have not heard one remark about books. I mean, when I was in school, that's when we went to the library for books. And now, is that still happening, or is the books are gone?
if I may, Senator, yes, the books are still there. The reason
Oh.
we've been talking so much about the internet is because that's the specific thing that this legislation provides funding for. So our books are funded independently of this. We are going to continue having robust collections, wonderful books for people of all ages to read in our public libraries. Don't worry, but we don't want to misallocate these funds. So we're focusing on the access to the building, the building projects that enable us to provide internet connectivity for the community.
How many public libraries in Vermont?
There are 185 public libraries, I believe.
185. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other committee members? Okay. Mr. Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. First, I'd like to start off by saying thank you for having me here. I've become familiar with a lot of committees over my 10 years with the state, but I haven't had the opportunity to speak with Senate institutions as often. So I'm very happy to be here today. I moved over to the Agency of Administration about 1.5 years ago, and I'm Deputy Secretary now. I was Chief Operational Officer when I moved over, but my primary focus, in addition to a slate of other duties, is managing and reviewing the program design and the risk structure. So when we implement any program with Coronavirus Relief Fund, State Fiscal Recovery, or in this case, Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. And so I just wanted to make the committee aware of that so that if you had questions and you'd like to hear from the administration related to how we're designing a certain program that was passed into law, or how we might go about designing a prospective program that you're discussing, I'd be happy to come in and speak with the committee about it. I think the one thing I'd like to say about this particular funding source is that starting off the bat, it's a misnomer. They call it the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, and it is for capital projects, but not the traditional capital projects as the states, Vermont and every other state in the country, has always viewed capital projects. So I think it is for capital investments, but it's specifically limited to investments that directly enable work, education, and health monitoring for communities. And libraries are fortunate to be on the list of presumptively eligible buildings, which makes it easier for us to access this funding. There's 113 million at play for Vermont, allocated to Vermont. We can use 5% of that for administrative purposes, and that's 5% across the whole spectrum. So that 900,000 that's in the current proposal, I think as we fine tune language, we should keep in mind that that's an estimate, and some programs might be above 5%, some might be below, but it'd be in everyone's interest if the administration was able to manage within that 5% budget and, make things as cheap as possible, but some programs might take a little bit more and some might take a little less. We can ask Treasury for a higher administrative allowance, but I think we all want to avoid that if at all possible. We want to get as much of this money out and helping the communities as possible. So I think the linchpin point I wanted to make for the committee is that Treasury has stressed in the guidance that directly enable work, education, and health monitoring. And for me, that translates to a space where a member of the public can come in with privacy, access the internet to do any of those tasks, right? And that's what libraries generally provide, and that's why they were given a presumptive category. And then you can get a little bit more complicated. You can talk about proportionality, but that element of public access to internet needs to be part of any use of these funds. And then the next steps, this is unlike the state fiscal recovery where we were given $1 billion and the legislature gets to decide along with the governor how to best deploy that. There's a lot of discretion built into the state fiscal recovery. This program is more like a traditional federal grant program. And we actually have to submit a grant plan to Treasury by September 24th of this year. And then they either deny or approve that grant plan. So we have to be pretty solid that our projects are going to be eligible and that we'll be submitting a plan that Treasury will approve. And I would also just keep in mind and try to recommend that if possible, it'd be nice to have authority to modify the grant plan only enough to get to secure Treasury's approval. Because if we submit a grant plan that's in line with what the Vermont legislature passes and Treasury rejects it and says, well, if you do these things, you can, we'll approve it. If we don't have authority to make some modifications, then we might not be able to secure Treasury's approval. And Treasury has posted that, if you don't, they're vague about it, but there's a possibility that Vermont's money could be given to another state if we aren't able to submit a grant plan and get it approved this fall. So I think there is a risk, unlike with state fiscal recovery, where we already have that money. We need to go out and get this money from the feds, and we need to make sure that our plans fall within Treasury's guidance, and that we have a little bit of leeway to try to fit intent to anything that Treasury pushes back on. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Chair, it's good to see you back. I was just thanking the committee for having me in and saying I look forward to working with you on. I haven't had an opportunity to work with Senate institutions often in the past, so it's nice to meet the committee. And happy to take any questions and happy to come back at a future date to talk about any of these pandemic funding sources as well.
Committee have any questions? Well, thank you to all three of you for coming by. I said this earlier to previous witnesses, but the capital bill on which we have our main vehicle for getting through the committee process is still over on the House side. If they happen to tweak it in some fashion that leads you to want to reach out and come back and talk to us, we'll see what we can do to correct whatever mistakes they've made for you. How's that?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for coming to join us. And Ms. Dalneo, thank you and good luck in your new world. It's an exciting time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, we're going to shift gears at this point. We're going to move back into section 9. And the Agency of Natural Resources Contaminants of Emerging Concern conversation will begin with Eric Blatt. He also has with him Brian Redmond, I understand, the Director for Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division of the Department of Environmental Conservation. Eric has been with us on several occasions over the last couple of weeks, so you guys all remember who he is. Brian, I don't remember if you were with him on one previous occasion. I think you might have been. But welcome back to Senate Institutions. And you know the standard routine that we try to keep the conversation as basic as possible to let our YouTube audience know what's going on. And if you get interrupted, it's only because I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to make sure we're talking in a way that the YouTube audience may be able to understand. So welcome back, gentlemen, to Senate Institutions. Eric, the floor is yours.
Okay, I think Brian will probably provide most of the testimony. I'll help answer any questions that might come up. Brian submitted a document that I think he's going to use to discuss the use of these funds. These are FY22 funds for essentially for addressing PFAS contamination at public water systems.
Brian, do you have the ability to screen share? You're going to need to unmute yourself first.
If I don't know whether as well, I have the document.
Yeah, I was going to say Alex can help you if you need to.
Yeah, that would be great, Alex. If you want to go ahead and share the document, that would be very helpful.
Right. So we shared basically the same document with the House Corrections Institutions Committee last week.
We could zoom that baby up a few notches. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, my thought was to start with a little bit of brief context before we dive into this list, if that sounds okay to you.
Yeah. Please do.
Okay. First, I guess like I started on the House side, I want to thank this committee for your engagement on this issue. PFAS perfluoroalkyl substances has been and continues to be a significant challenge for the state of Vermont. And has put a lot of burden on our most smallest water systems in the state. So I really appreciate this committee's engagement and work on this issue. And the CECF funds have proven to be a really important tool for us to meet some of the challenges that we've encountered over the last 2+ years related to PFAS and drinking water. In terms of context, the broader regulation of public water systems in Vermont, there's approximately 1,350 public water systems in the state of Vermont. And these are broken out into 3 categories. The first category, there's approximately 700 of them. They're transient non-community water systems, often referred to as TNCs. These are your campgrounds, your hotels, your motels, restaurants, breweries, things of that nature. The next category are non-transient, non-community water systems, referred to as NTNC. And these are your schools and your office buildings, things of that nature that are served by their own on-site water supply. There's approximately 250 of those in the state of Vermont. And then finally, your community water systems. There's approximately 400 of those, and those are your towns, cities, villages, fire districts, homeowner associations, things of that nature. Under current regulations, the state of Vermont has tested all of our community and non-transient, non-community water systems for PFAS contamination. So we've made our way through both the NTNCs and the community water systems. The TNCs, the 700 hotels, motels, campgrounds, things of that nature, aren't required to routinely test, but we do have the authority to require testing if there is a reason to believe there may be a known or suspected contamination issue. So as you can see in this list, there's several systems, water systems that are TNCs along the Killington Access Road. And so that's an area where we have found a known source of contamination and have required some of these types of water systems to sample. So moving on to the list here. We've done a fair amount of sampling, and this is our current list of projects on the CECF. We have a total of 15 public water systems that are currently listed on the list. So just to remind the committee, we've had 2 years of appropriations going into the CECF. In FY22, 500,000, and then FY23, another 500,000. Currently, we have a 1.5 million approximately in total need, and we have a total anticipated award amount of approximately 940,000. Again, those 2 last systems we don't have cost estimates for, so they're not reflected in that bottom line that you see here. The difference between the total need and the total anticipated award, the Department for the Administration of the CECF established predefined grant percentages. These are 100% grants for municipally owned school water systems, 75% grants for non-transient, non-community, so school water systems that are privately owned, and then 50% grants going towards community water supplies in the transient non-communities. So at this point, with these list of 15, we're approaching the $1 million figure. Since in more recent times, as you may or may not be aware, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, our drinking water state revolving loan funds are set to receive significant new sources of funding through supplemental appropriations to the DWSRF. And Eric can speak to these in more detail. But what we're anticipating for the state of Vermont is approximately $7.5 million annually for the next 5 years for a supplemental SRF appropriation specifically to address PFAS and other emerging contaminants in drinking water. So our longer term plan is to start shifting from the use of the CECF into our revolving loan funds. And at this point in time, we're anticipating those appropriations to come through sometime in August. So our long-term plan is to start shifting away from these funds and use the federal funds. The federal funds themselves, again, it's anticipated to be about 7.5 million annually for 5 years. That particular supplemental fund does not come with a state matching requirement. And the grants must go out to the communities at 100%. So we're feeling pretty confident that that's going to be the funding source for at least the next 5 years related to PFAS in drinking water systems. And Eric, I don't know, do you have anything else to contribute on that piece?
No, no, I think you've summed it up pretty well. We've pretty much gone through the 2021 appropriation for this purpose, and we're just starting to award grants with this second round of funding.
Can I ask either one of you, for a private homeowner who is concerned about their particular well, is there any grant money available for testing purposes?
Currently, there is not. There is no grant funding available for what are termed potable water supply, so homeowner wells. Our read right now of the federal money that's coming to the state is it will follow the same guidelines as our current revolving loan fund as far as eligibility, and homeowner supplies will not be eligible. At every opportunity we've had so far, we've provided feedback to EPA in the guidelines, along with a number of our other New England states, that we would like to see that eligible because it remains a bit of a gap.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? McCormick?
Senator McCormick.
Thanks. I'm just trying to get a sense of what exactly is going on at these sites. Is the problem that actually there's contaminated water or water with chemicals of concern coming out of the tap, or that they are contributing the questionable chemicals to the groundwater, to the ambient environment?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Senator. So these projects that are listed here are all public water systems. So this is monitoring at the tap. So at basically the water that would be delivered prior to treatment to the user. So that's what's representative on this list. Our waste management prevention division, so in addition to the regulation of the public water supply, our waste management and prevention division looks at the degree and the extent of the contamination and goes through a process to identify the possible responsible parties for the contamination. So there is an element to this where we're evaluating the site from a groundwater characterization perspective. And I will say, in terms of the Killington properties, there's two discrete areas there. And as we find higher levels by testing both public and private water supplies in those areas, our area of interest continues to grow until we're assured that we have that properly characterized.
Now, so are these hotels? Some of these are hotels. Does that mean that the customers who go there, the guests, are drinking contaminated water out of the tap?
No. So if a public water supply exceeds what we refer to as the maximum contaminant level for PFAS, which we established here in Vermont in 2019 through Act 21. Yeah. And so if a system exceeds those levels, it's 20 parts per trillion. And once that first sample comes back above or at or above 20 parts per trillion, we require a confirmation sample. Once it's confirmed that there's an exceedance of that level, a do not drink order is issued immediately. And those properties are now needing to supply an alternate source of water for drinking and cooking until the remedy can go in place. Many of these projects in Killington, the space is a challenge. So there, as you'll see, most of them are installing water treatment devices. But there's planning underway already in the town of Killington to look at extending a municipal water supply up the access road. They have identified 2 well sources down in the valley and are at approximately 90-ish% of the preliminary planning for a municipal scale system to connect these and other properties.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Brian, I'm curious, is there a difference in the analysis from the state's perspective as opposed to the federal government's perspective for parts per billion that are acceptable?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The state has established a maximum contaminant level for 5 perfluorinated compounds for a cumulative value of 20 parts per trillion. EPA currently has a health advisory for PFOA and PFOS, which are 2 of the Vermont 5 compounds that we're regulating. Health advisory is a non-legally enforceable number. And that value is currently at 70 parts per trillion. So Vermont has a legally enforceable standard with additional compounds at lower levels than what EPA is currently regulating. There is a lot of science and literature and movement at the federal level related to PFAS. But as of right now, there's no maximum contaminant level established. I think they're anticipating it sometime next year, though.
Is there a problem with the state's analysis being so much lower? If the federal government is contributing to this revenue stream, is there some kind of a connection between the amount of money that the feds are willing to give in comparison to what the numbers are that we're expecting people to have to put up with?
Eric, please chime in here, but I do not believe, I believe the answer would be no to that. There are a number of states due to a lack of federal action that have taken similar measures as Vermont. So there are a number of states within the country that have established their own levels. Just because EPA has not been able to do that, states have taken the matter into their own hands, including Vermont and several other New England states. So I believe that's a no, but Eric, I don't know if you have confirmation on that.
Yeah, the definition is fairly broad at this point. In fact, EPA is looking to the states to offer input into the definition of emerging contaminants. PFAS is pretty well recognized. There's no set limit in the definition. So I don't think that the fact that Vermont may have a higher standard at the moment than the EPA health level would be an issue for us.
Yeah, I want to make clear, I'm not trying to suggest that Vermont's standard is any kind of wrong standard. I'm just curious as to whether or not the feds have made some kind of a connection between the money that they give out and the actual decisions by the various states to be different than what the feds would recommend. But it sounds like the answer is no, they don't.
No, right. The answer is no. They don't. So the SRF programs, the way they're designed, it's very much up to the states in terms of how they construct their priority system. And that's really ultimately what dictates who receives the fund, what projects receive the funding. There are certain, and I think I mentioned this some previous testimony, there are 3 sort of critical areas that have to be weighted higher than other areas when constructing the priority system. But none of them actually get to the point of the EPA specifying to the states what limits the values that they have to impose in order to receive points.
Okay. Brian, I think I interrupted you. I'm not sure where else you're going with it.
I think that's all that I have for today. Happy to answer other questions if there are other questions.
Alex, if we could take the screen share down, I might be able to see if there's questions.
I do appreciate taking the screen share down. I noticed I had an extra 0 in my in one of my line items, so I was
It was
staring at
stolen
that.
from, right, it was stolen from Craftsbury. It was one less there. So we can send a revised sheet if that's acceptable.
Well, whenever you get into trouble, Alex is pretty good about getting things up and down on the screen, so you're covered. Committee, any questions?
Good.
If not, gentlemen, appreciate you coming by to join us this afternoon. I'm sure you'll be back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. We'll see you again. Shifting gears once again, moving to section 12, public safety regarding Pittsburgh. Alex, I don't see anybody else on the screen at the moment.
No, we are not yet joined by Michael. I will reach out to him and see if he can come in a little early.
Okay. Committee, it is 2:34 by my watch. 2:45 is when we are expecting Michael DeRushy. So how about we take a 5-minute break and come back?
What happened when you and Vince didn't last long?
That's because I talk quick.
Wow, that must have been a $10 job.
Well, I have to make sure I talk before Vince does, so I get everything in front of the judge and the judge decides how to do it. And then Vince is left behind, so to speak. But yeah, we're good.
Did you win?
It was only a status conference, Dick.
Oh,
Eventually I'll win, but for today's purposes, it was just telling the judge where we are.
are we off?
We are still live on the camera.
I can take us off.
Okay, because I